Welcome to l'arte dell'arme, the Bolognese podcast, where we discuss the intricacies of the Bolognese tradition. Today's guest is Dan Bernardo.
Hey Dan, how are you doing? Welcome to the Art of Arms podcast. We're really excited to have you here today.
Yeah, welcome Dan.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Our guest today is Dan Bernardo, who's come to talk to us about his badass stick fighting tradition that he understands. So Dan, I think so far you are the only person I've heard of that has the badass story of like, I have learned the art that was passed down through generations to my father, to my grandfather. He, in secret sessions, showed me the secrets of the stick.
Well, damn it! I'm gonna have to go because that's not true at all.
Darn! So tell us about this the stick fighting that you have been teaching.
Let me at least say this. I think it's pretty badass, the actual stick work, but the way that I learned it is not as cool. Sadly, can't make a movie about it. But when I was little, right? Like, I don't remember when the Ninja Turtles came out, but I mean, that time. Right?
Right.
Sure. I became obsessed, right? The Karate Kid, Ninja Turtles, like right. I was obsessed with martial arts. And there was a brief year or two where I lived next door to my grandparents. And, my pap found out. He said, "Oh, come on, let's go and stick fight." And I'm like, okay, fine. And, we got some broom handles and
right.
And that was it. I mean, it was fun. There was he would make me do crap that I absolutely despised. Like I made, JD do it at the event. There's an arm exercise that you do that, I think I again, like there's so much about it that I don't really remember 100%. Whether he did it specifically to create some form of positive skill development or whether it was just torture for me. But
so there's like some wax on, wax off stuff?
Well, no, not really. Okay. That would be more like take the broom and sweep the thing, which he made me do, but that had nothing to do with the stick fighting, I don't think. But I mean, we would spend, I don't know, hours maybe, in the yard, just whacking each other with sticks. And I didn't, let me press this. I did not think for a second that he was teaching me stick fighting. Not for a second.
No.
I thought it was my pap trying to be cool. I thought it was my pap trying to, make me happy because I couldn't go and do karate, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. And we did that for a while, and then I actually did start karate, and then I stopped doing that because, well, I'm doing real martial arts now, Pat.
Right.
And it really wasn't until I was in college that, I was having a conversation with someone, and they said. Well, martial arts, you know where this term comes from. In my brain, I'm thinking, yeah, I know the Chinese character for Wu, and I know the Chinese character for Shu. Like, I know where this comes from. And he goes, no. The term martial comes from Mars, the god of war.
Right.
It's a Western term. And I went, oh. And he was like, there's Western martial arts, right? And I went, yeah, you mean like boxing? He's like, no, there's like historical Western fencing and stuff like that. And so that's when I started to get into HEMA. And so I'm talking like mid 2000s, right?
Okay.
So back when Arma was probably, far more popular than it should have been.
Yep.
And so I went down this rabbit hole of, I'm Italian, I want to look for Italian martial arts. And I came across these videos of Italian stick fighting, and I went, holy crap, that's what I was doing with my pap.
Nice.
What the hell? Right? Like, so he was already way too old and not with it, and I couldn't really have conversations with him about it, but I was able to kind of pick his brain a little bit about, like, bastone. I would get this word in his head, and he would go, oh yeah, balla bastone, da da da. And then, like, so it started me kind of looking at Southern Italian dances.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And there are bastone dances, and specifically in Sicily and Calabria and also in Abruzzo, which is where my family system's from. And I'm like, this looks almost identical to what we did. And it's, some of the really stupid, funny stuff that I remember doing. I was like, oh yeah, there it is. and so I started to kind of piece things together, and it really wasn't until maybe 2012, 2013 maybe, that I decided I wanted to actually preserve it, kind of formulate it into a system, and then teach it. Because it wasn't really a system beforehand. I didn't learn a system. I didn't get, certified in the family art of Bastone. That's not the way it worked. So,
right.
What I teach now really is kind of a combination of what I did with my pap, what I've seen done in Italy, which reminded me of what I did with my pap, and then also, my experience with Japanese arts and with other Italian sword arts, specifically Fiore, of course, because everybody does Fiore. And so that's really the background of what I call Contro Passo, which is really kind of the only Italian word my pap would use a whole lot. And he didn't speak fluent Italian. So I do believe that it's a kind of a broken Italian term. I think he really meant to say incontro passo, which means to meet and pass, because that's what the Italian stick is doing. You're meeting force, but because it's either a sword or a rifle or something much stronger than this stick, I'm not going to try to meet it force on force. I'm gonna give it something to engage with, and then I'm gonna let it go and let my stick do the work. So
got it. Because you don't have a guard, you're deflecting rather than trying to capture.
Absolutely. If you try to block a sword with a stick, you're just gonna get sliced in half with the stick. So
cool.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So you said you've been to Italy. I'm assuming southern Italy.
I've never been to Italy.
Oh, you've never been to Italy?
No, okay. I've never been to Italy.
Man. You never been to Italy? That's sad.
No, doesn't it suck? Being poor. No.
Yeah, being poor sucks too.
So, but the internet is awesome, right? So right. I've made friends with Bastone practitioners and teachers in Italy, and have picked their brains and talked to them for years. One keeps getting on me about writing a book, but I don't have time. maybe someday.
What can you tell us about the modern practice of bastone in Italy?
I think, to be honest, they're doing something very, very similar to me. They're just trying to keep it preserved. I think one of the issues that we have, specifically with any historical art, is it's hard to keep young people engaged. It's hard to keep people wanting to remember the good old days, so to speak. And I'm not saying that you should be completely nostalgic, because I don't believe in that. But what I think the Italians are doing well is they are finding ways of putting it into competition. They're finding ways of putting Bastone work into educational systems, and just trying to kind of do with what Anko Itosu did in Karate in Okinawa, just kind of like make it more available to the public, because I think a lot of the Southern Italian systems were, a family system or a secretive system, specifically when you start to look at the knife systems. But they, they're very romantic about it, of course, being Italian. But one thing that I really think people need to pay attention to more is what is demonstrated in public via the festivals, because there's stick dances done at festivals all the time, and really that's the work right there. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's always been kind of a prevailing theory, and kind of especially in the Bolognese space, that the abbottamenti are that. Like it's a way of kind of demonstrating your art or selling what you're doing within your sal, and saying, hey, like, this is what we're doing. Check it out. This doesn't look great. Come in and see, that kind of thing.
Well, that's one theory. I think it was a way to play with sharps.
Or the assaulti. Yeah. Well, that's probably what
they were bored out of their mind, right? That's the
right.
Yeah.
The abbottamenti are probably that, playing with sharp swords. The assaulti might be
the solo stuff.
More of a demonstration.
Yeah.
Just something to investigate.
I like So when I think of the assaulti, because even we do assaulti in the Bastone system, and I like to think of it very similarly to forms or kata or hyung and other arts, where they are designed for you to have something to practice when you don't have a partner, and that's primarily its goal and its purpose. Once you have a partner, you do what we call danza, or dancing. And so, partner drills. You don't do assaulti when you have people around you.
Yeah, I'm always a huge proponent of solo forms. I think it's one thing that HEMA in particular lacks a really good focus on, is solo forms. I mean, the Bolognese practitioners, for the most part, most of the Italian practitioners that do Northern Italian fencing, but especially those who do Bolognese, because there are a lot of assaulti that they can do, typically have really good form practice. And it shows up. It really does. Like when I watch a Bolognese practitioner that I know has a good form practice that goes through the assaulti and things like that, their movement quality, their structure, their ability to kind of like really suss out the details of plays that we might see in the abbottamenti are really good. And I think like that's such a key aspect of martial training. How have you seen that? Like, I mean, obviously you were talking about doing it with the bastone, but even in your other martial arts experience, what do you see as like the core tenets of form practice?
So, I mean, martial is about cultivating a specific kind of body, right? Mm-hmm. So if you practice a Taijiquan, you have to cultivate a Taijiquan body. If you practice boxing, you have to cultivate a boxing body. The human body reacts to its environment naturally. We evolve to what our body does. If you sit in an office in a chair all day, you will cultivate an office body. When you then go to stand up, and maybe go for a run, your body is not used to it, so you have to train your body to run. Okay? If you ran a whole lot and then you sat in a desk, your body would not be natural sitting at a desk. You'd have to train your body to sit at a desk. So form work is how you cultivate that body.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It's physiologically, it's just what we do. It's how we learn. So if you watch, like you said, if you watch somebody who does have good form, right? And they have cultivated this body. When they have to use it, the body just moves in that way because that's how it's naturally moving. Mm-hmm. So 100% I agree with you.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, there are some things that I felt like I was really natural at when I took your Bastone class, and there were some things that I was just like, this is blowing my mind.
Oh, cool. Bummed I wasn't able to take it, man. That would have been so cool. You guys are just on the wrong coast is the problem. You got to get over it this way.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting, right? Because like you talk about like cultivating that martial body, your body starts to kind of become attuned to doing certain things. And so like, for example, in your class, like keeping the left hand with the right hand, I primarily practice with single sword. So that's even if I'm doing buckler practice, maybe, but yeah, I mean, like things like that, or even trying to skip. Like I felt like I was so confident in everything we were doing, and then we did that dog defense, and I was like, this is so like counterintuitive to like my normal martial practice. Just feels so weird, and I probably look like such a buffoon, but
everybody does.
Yeah, well, I find it really interesting because I think that there's also an aspect of your muscle memory in terms of you're training good habits to react in a certain way. And I think that there's a key to being able to decipher things that are going on within the textual material as to why they're encouraging certain practices, right? Mm-hmm. Because like if you have an assaultee and you're doing repetitive actions and you're doing certain practices, there's usually a meaning behind it. As in, this is a good you're training a defense. You're training an action that should be a good, safe thing to do. Do you see that a lot with the Bastone in particular in terms of like how you're building out those core mechanics and everything like that?
Oh, absolutely. Most of our assaulti begin in guardia. We don't tend to start in any other position because our in guardia moves backwards. So the stick stays in front of us and we move away from the stick and we allow the tip to come up. And this is just a very basic, simple way of not necessarily engaging with an opponent, but putting us in a position where we could, if we needed to, without being incredibly aggressive or incredibly provocative. And from in guardia, we normally will either passare in avanti, like we move forward with a passing step, or we move off to the sides in triangolos with mezzanis, either with a full mezzani or a reverso mezzani, which basically means you switch your hands. So the left hand, which is here, usually like what we did in the class, you bring your right hand to it and then you swing this way. Where I'm at reverso, you actually switch your hands and then you slide this hand up to it and you spin it that way. So, but these are just basically almost always used because it is a very, very good movement against somebody coming at you straight, which is, I think, what they were met with most of the time.
Yeah, the default human way of striking is, basically it seems to me assaulti train you, the primary thing they train you is to not go straight at somebody who's going straight, but to overcome the natural instinct to want to do that and to move to one side or the other side, which is where like real fencing, at least in the Bolognese perspective, begins.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, when I look at the Bolognese system, I see very, very similar footwork. It's just heavier. Whereas in the Bastone system, it's much lighter. We're dancing.
What do you mean by heavier?
Meaning when I take a step, that's the step. Right?
Okay.
Like if I take a step, that's the step. But in Bastone, I take a step and I'm stepping. You know what I mean? The feet are like this. we're dancing. We're very light, and it might just be a difference in. I mean, I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe you have some insights, but when I do fencing, even Japanese fencing, we don't dance. We're not tiptoeing around like we do in the
pretty
Bastone.
clear instructions that you are not to dance. It is, according to the Anonymous Bolognese, dancing is great for training footwork ability, but sword fighting is not dancing.
Right.
See, in Bastone, it is.
I think, yeah. Well, and also, it could stem a little bit from the weight of the weapon that you're using. A stick generally maybe like a pound, if that. Whereas with a sword, you have something that's 2 pounds. You might need to get more body mechanics behind it, so you might have to engage the hips and things like that, especially if you're fencing with your whole body. So it could be that you want a little bit more of a grounded approach, just because you're going to be moving something a bit heavier.
I think maybe it's because we end up wrestling a lot.
Well, we do, yeah.
A lot of Bolognese is like you're moving into positions that as soon as something weird, wonky happens with the swords, you're going to come into the wrestling part with an advantage.
Oh, see, in Bastone, it's opposite.
Okay.
As soon as I get in and something funky happens, I'm bouncing out.
Getting the hell out. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that is one option, too, so you can play that game, too, but I think it's generally considered the beta move. So the alpha move is to come in and try and, control and then constrain and then win the grapple or win the mental spot and win the grapple. And then if you can't do that, then you're trying to get away and dance away and strike to the hands and the arms.
Gotcha.
But I think it's connected to Fiore. So when I saw Fiore's wrestling positions, I kind of thought, that looks sort of Bolognese.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Marazzo did copy his dagger material, so it's,
Well, we'll have to have that argument.
And then wrestling is wrestling, no matter who you are or where you're from or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, you put your knee in a certain way, it gives you an advantage, no matter what style or ethnicity you're from. So
especially as long as it's the honorable throw them to the ground type and not the get in the ground and wrestle around in the mud with the peasants type.
Right. But we do see that the Bolognese definitely did have value in the Bastone. In Filippo Dardi's letter to the Bolognese government in 1443, he does one of the things he gives his whole pedagogical curriculum, and one of the weapons that he was teaching was the Bastone. So there's still the Bastone art beside longsword, sword and buckler, and he actually valued Bastone more than he did sword and buckler, which we see as kind of like the core principle of Bolognese fencing. So there was something different about it, and there was something special about it from his perspective. That it was
maybe, but this is what I'm wondering, and this is probably a good question for Dan. What is the connection between the principles of Bastone and using and fencing with a spear or other polearm?
I would say specifically with spear, with a Bastone, you don't have anything pointy.
Right.
I mean, like every once in a while, you'll see, especially like with the Sicilians, they'll sometimes have like how like when you walk around with a cane, you have a rubber tip at the end or a copper tip at the end. Yeah. They would sometimes have that tip covering a point. And so they would take the tip off, and then they would use
typical Sicilian behavior.
Yeah, I was going to say, they're kind of the nasty guys, right?
But for the most part, I think when I study spear work, you're not swinging.
Okay, so there's really no connection. Okay,
I would say probably not, and not in my system. Kind of remember, my system is mostly I would say 99% a peasant system.
Okay.
They weren't soldiers training to learn how to use a sword. They weren't, you know what I mean? They were sheep farmers, and they worked on a sheep farm. And so they just had a staff right? If you look up in a Google search, contadino, and you look at like contadino from the 1800s or something like that, and you look up pictures, you're going to see pictures of people standing with a stick, right? Like about shoulder high or solar plexus high. Like it was just a walking stick. So when we start to have these conversations about what influenced what, I mean, I really don't know if there was any influence at all, right? I mean, they were
that's just what I was wondering then, like, because why did he value the bastone so much more highly unless it was to be used for military purposes as training for how to use a hafted weapon? But maybe it was just the bastone was just so useful that people wanted the knowledge on their own.
I mean, if you're a traveler, right, especially if you're traveling in a city and, there are weapons restrictions as to what you can carry. But if you have a walking stick, you might actually be able to keep that.
But
even to this day, I can get on a plane with my walking stick.
Yeah.
But if it being Italy, it kind of I get the impression that maybe every village and every town and every family already has its own extant way of fighting with a stick. So then Dardi's would have to be some improvement over the country version if it was a pure bastone, or presumably he wouldn't be able to charge so much money for it.
That's a good point.
That's very possible.
I mean,
or
really have to do it because it has to be like,
or the way that he did it simply was a transition into some other weapon.
Shit, that's probably what it was, is actually start with the bastone and use that as a way to become a good spearman, so you're piggybacking on to people's already existing martial knowledge. Okay,
that makes a whole lot of sense, because the Jo was taught the same way in Japan.
Right, so you start with all the swingy stuff. Wait, this sounds just like sword and buckler. You start with all the wide play swinging stuff, and you eventually transition that into little tight movements to control the center, and a more thrust focused. Oh, interesting. Okay, cool.
It's very possible.
That logically makes a lot of sense. Cool.
Logic.
Yeah, that's great shit, man. Great shit. All right, so I don't remember the name of this stickmaster. You may do, but one famous stickmaster, I believe from the 1800s, somewhere in southern Italy, said that his art had descended from that of Achille Marozzo. Are you familiar with Marozzo, and can you make a comparison kind of between the bastone art and Marozzo's as you see it?
I mean, I'm not familiar with who said that. But I'm familiar with Marozzo and his system. But I think when it comes down to it, if you have a long object that you have to swing around to hit another person and not get hit by the other person, there's not that many ways that you can do it.
Okay.
Right? So what would be similar to what would be different? Tactics, right? So what are ways that we want to take care of line? What are ways that we want to take care of tempo? What are ways that we want to take care of measure? I think that's where it differs. Because I don't want to engage with a sword when I have a stick. But if I have a sword, I have no problem engaging with that sword.
Right.
So that, I think, that the tactics there are what differs, not the actual movements. And when you watch some of the Assalti, Marozzo's Assalti, you also don't see him using the Elite very similarly to the way that we do.
Right.
Elite means like ellipse. So what we do in the bastone is when we're swinging the sword, we don't want to stop its movement. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to like do a falso cut, stop it, and then do a true edge cut. Like I don't want to do that.
That's too tempy.
Exactly. But also, because my stick is not sharp, when I hit you, I have to have a lot of momentum.
In order to stop the next blow. Right.
Or to do any sort of damage.
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So if I come up here and I stop, I've stopped momentum, and I have to start momentum again. So in the Bastone system, we use Eliche to change the direction of the stick without stopping it. So if I'm coming up here and I want to go down, I will use an Eliche to come down. So it kind of comes up and then goes like this. So it like changes, changes gears, or it changes gears like this.
Whereas we would
and
do
then
like
the same
a
way
winding
going
type of
down.
action. Right. Hmm. So it's like with a sword, you would do kind of a winding action to come back down.
Right.
Because that would be faster, but you need to have the extra momentum if you have a stick.
Right.
Okay.
So we Eliche a lot. Like a ton. And that, I think, is something that is pretty unique to Italian stick fighting, or at least my system of Italian stick fighting. But yeah, I mean, the rest of it, I mean, you're swinging around a big, long thing.
There's just only so much you can do.
Yeah, so
right?
Hidden in the depths of Marazzo, there is actually a similar sort of tactical paradigm that he proposes that's similar to what you're talking about with the Eliche. And it's where he says, so let me see if I can find this specifically here. But so if you wish for honor to be attentive and look for him as he rises and falls from his guards and counters. But note that if you were to find someone you hadn't approached as I've told you, then you should embellish the play so that you make him move, as you'll understand that if he cannot be made to move, then you won't want to go into any guard such that he can find him, so that way you can find him during his counter. And in this way you will achieve honor. I also want to teach you that no one will ever be able to find you in any of these said ways if you make sure never to remain fixed in any guard, that is, make the ending of one become the beginning of another, and this way your enemy will never be able to find you in falling nor in rising. So he kind of starts that whole thing out talking about how if you do an action like what Stephen was talking about, where you go from one guard and you end in another, it's too timpy, but there's also, you're weak in between those two motions. So Marazzo's answer to that is just stay in perpetual motion. Like if you're trying to provoke an enemy who is still and they're fixed in guard, to stay in perpetual motion and to use his embellishments and things like that, which kind of gives us a hint as to how we're supposed to do those embellishments that he teaches. Because I think a lot of people look at the embellishment and they're like, this is ridiculous, right? But there's actually like a tactical framework, and it seems similar to the Bastone in that regard, in terms of how do you achieve that? How do you achieve that constant perpetual motion with the sword?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say there's definitely similarities there. When we look at the tactics of the Eliche, they are usually used for feints or some sort of disengage, or cavare sopra or sotto, like when you're kind of going over or underneath. They're mostly there for provocation or just trying to elicit some response from your opponent. I would say that's probably incredibly similar.
Yeah, I think another similarity that struck me was the play that we did where you're either provoking by tapping on the ground in front of them, like saying like, come on, asshole, I dare you to attack me, right? Or attacking their leg.
Yeah, it sounds like a total embellishment action.
Or you're attacking their leg and you're covering out of that attack to the leg. Marazzo does that in his second assault. Like there's a play that's like verbatim with like that same provocation and setup and like kind of flow into a grapple. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So let's talk through some of the fundamentals of the Bastone in terms of like what are the primary movements? What are some of the things that like, what are the different actions? What are the mechanics and things like that?
So, I mean, really, it's simple. We do, downward strikes, upward strikes, horizontal strikes. I mean,
It sounds familiar.
They're really similar, right? I mean, we'll punta, but only to evoke something, right? Or to move them backwards, right? So like if I want to push somebody away, I'll push them away with the stick. But so we have figure eights, forward and reverse. We have them, down here and up here, right? So we did that drill, which teaches Iliche. You have Iliches, you have Molinellos, right? Just basic, twirls.
Tremezoni.
Yeah, I mean, like, really, really basic stuff.
And then there are core mechanics to the colpo too, right? In terms of like how a colpo is performed.
Yes. So again, you saw this in effect.
I did.
So because it's a stick and not a sharp sword, you don't want to strike the person like it's a sword because you'll break the stick. So you want to, I'm going to try to back up here. It's really hard. Is this going to be video or audio?
Audio.
Anyway, so
It's audio.
It's audio? Okay.
Yeah.
So so there's a movement that we do that it is the core drill that I mentioned earlier that, my pap used to have me do 500 times on each hand. And essentially you hold the stick and you bring the palm up, straight the arm, and then or slightly bend the arm anyway, and then you straighten the arm and you put it palm down. So it's like palm up, palm down, palm up, palm down. And what it's doing is teaching you how to pop with the forearm.
Right. So you can make a little snapping cut.
Correct.
Snapping
so
strike,
when you strike with the bastone, you want to concuss and strike through the target so that you can continue to move in and out of it. Sure. But you don't want to hit super hard. So that is, but you do that in sword too sometimes, right? Like that's not a huge
You do.
difference.
I learned
that in Kendo. You know what I mean? Like that's how
what I said.
Kendo
It sounds like a Kendo move. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
The thing is,
like when you strike the helmet in Japanese sword, you don't want to cut it down. You want to knock it up and off. So you strike it up so that you can thrust underneath it. So it's like this. So that's what that strike is for.
Yeah.
It's similar,
I think what's interesting is that where I've seen that mechanic show up in my own practice, and what really struck me about that when we were doing it with the bastone is that's how I teach a beat. So like when you make a beat to your sword, you want that percussive pop. And in order to get that percussive pop, you almost have to go weak, right? So you turn that wrist up. You don't necessarily, like with a sword in particular, you don't have to like turn palm up necessarily. You can just kind of like weaken the wrist and then snap back down into it. It's like the 2-inch punch of sword fighting. That's what I tell my students all the time, because they always really like it's a mechanic that they struggle with. Like it's like you can't just intuitively get somebody to do it. You have to have them practice it 500 times on each hand, and really kind of like build it into them. But it's incredibly effective as a mechanic in sword fighting.
Oh yeah, so like when we taunt and hit the legs, we do that same. It's the same mechanic of the hand and the arm. When you if you were gonna wind from finestra down into a colpi, and it's the same exact thing. I think that mechanic of the wrist and forearm is used far more than anything else in our system.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot of that in the Bolognese too. The push cuts. This is kind of that same basic idea.
Yeah, and so like when we do figure eights, like they're actually like if you were to put a sword in your hand, they're false edge cuts. So like but it's the same mechanic of the hand. So if I'm coming down to flip it, it then becomes a false edge as it comes down, and then a false edge as it comes down. Because I'm trying to keep my elbows in.
Right.
Right.
Falso
so it's like
puntato.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, it's all. I mean, again, you can only move your body so many ways when you're trying to move a long point, skinny object. So, other than that, I mean, we'll block with like with a two-handed kind of thing. We block that way. We manipulate this way, but it's really simple. Okay. Like it's funny because people ask me like, "Oh, could you teach me your system?" Yeah. Give me 20 minutes. I'll teach you the system. It's so simple.
What is it like? So you've done both sides of the coin now. You've looked at kind of compiling stuff from living arts, and then you've also done the staring at the old manuscript and trying to figure out how to turn that into a living art. What do you think are some takeaways maybe or impressions that you've had in comparing those two approaches or two things that you've done?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think that they both fail in the same way.
Great.
In that when we do a living tradition, if it is a sword tradition or a stick tradition that is not used anymore, outside of the dojo or the sal or whatever that you are, in, and you're just trying to preserve this tradition, you are not using it for real.
Right.
So what you're doing is I always try to tell people this. Martial arts is not a study of combat. Okay?
Okay.
When we think of traditional martial arts or HEMA or Japanese sword or any of these things, right? These are not practices of combat. We are studying people. We are studying things that somebody did at some point and thought it good enough to teach others. That's it.
Okay.
You might find within the system that you are doing, whether it's living or dead, that this particular engagement, this particular technique might have only worked for this person once.
Right. And then
the other person might have been
put
drunk.
it down in a book. Right.
And he was like, that was awesome. I'm going to put this down. Right.
That's totally what I'm getting from doing the Anano is that we are so bad right now. Like, our fencing is so simple, and at a certain point, people get confused and go, I don't know, I'm just going to stab them. Right? Like, so much of it doesn't work because we had, like, you're just not going to run across people with any depth of knowledge whatsoever, and there's no consequence or fear because everybody's eyes are protected.
Right.
And so they're going to respond in different ways. So, but that is definitely what I'm getting to is like we are so terrible at doing martial arts now, like sword-based martial arts, that so much of it is even inaccessible.
I agree, but it's not our fault, right?
No, we're doing the best we can, man. We're
doing the best we can, but even in some of the systems that I've been exposed to, like there are secret techniques, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
One of them, is kneel down, grab some sand, throw it in their face, and stab them in the throat.
Wait a second.
That's it.
That sounds vaguely familiar. Isn't that a little bit like something Fiore does?
It's Fiore, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That's a secret technique, right? And it's like, that's not a secret technique. You did that when you were like 10, and you did it on the playground or whatever, right? And you thought it was cool,
right?
Like, but see, there's the thing about the living traditions, even within empty hand work, like if you're studying any sort of martial arts that doesn't involve a weapon, they have always gone through this. We need this vetting process for students, right? Like, it doesn't matter if you pay me. What matters is, do I find you morally high enough to give you things that can kill another person?
Right.
And sometimes this process would get drawn out for years and a person would have to prove their virtue to then be able to learn things that would be incredibly dangerous.
Thus we get back to Mancellino's complaint about people who will just sell the art to the highest bidder.
Right.
Which I guess there's probably that too in every martial art also, right?
There absolutely is. There absolutely is. There's no difference. It was one of the biggest complaints about karate in Japan was you're teaching this, you're giving this away to just everybody. So then the theory is that's how karate got watered down, is because they had to take away the dangerous stuff.
So then people say it doesn't work. Sorry, go ahead, Josh.
Yeah.
Well, that's where we get into like the introduction of Fiore, where he says, I could teach you how to do this where you're not going to hurt somebody, but I'm going to teach you how to break people, right? Like, I mean, that's basically like the introduction of his book. He said, I can teach you this in one of two ways. I can teach you this as like, something you can practice with your friends, or something that you could do if you were faced with an enemy, and I'm going to teach you the latter. So, I mean...
Well, yeah, because this book was marketing for his school, right?
That's right.
He wanted,
for his private education, yeah.
Exactly, right? So he didn't want people who just wanted to play around. That's not what he wanted to teach. So, and his book is clearly not for beginners, right? Like, you don't learn his stuff if you don't already know what in the hell you're doing. So, and that's another problem with HEMA, is so many of these manuals are written for people who already have training.
Right.
So we come into it with training in something, a lot of us, maybe it's sport fencing, maybe it's Japanese martial arts, maybe it's something else, and we come at it from this perspective, and oftentimes the tactics are different, right? So you have to kind of unlearn ways of thinking. For instance, if you study, Katori Shinturiwa, you're not grappling. You're trying to stay in Itoma as much as possible. You watch their Kenshitsu kata, and they're dancing around because that thing is sharp, and I don't want to be stabbed by it. So I'm like out here, and I'm kind of, the Japanese do a lot of footwork. They move around a whole lot. They don't do a lot of blade on blade work. They don't do a lot of bind work. Yes, the swords are expensive and they don't want to break the swords. However, we do see examples of swords that are just banged like crazy. Right. Even these. So I don't believe that theory.
But they don't have a false edge. That's kind of the thing.
Some of them do.
So they do.
There is a blade geometry that was not as common. But it's called Unukobizukuri, and it has a false edge down the first third of the tip.
Okay, that's interesting. Like a Krieg Messer.
So, yeah, exactly. So that does exist, and it did exist in reality. But the majority of the work was, almost like if you were to give two people a really sharp sword and say, "All right, guys." First person to kill the other, right? Wins. And so, people are not going to be readily, excited to jump in and start grappling with these things. Like, I think that's where they both fail, right? We're both trying to do something that we can't do in reality. So we're pretending to understand this stuff. I think it's one of the reasons why I enjoy the Bastone far more than I enjoy sword work, because I can use it, and I have used it. And with that said, I think that what the sources in HEMA does much better than the sources in Asia is they actually want to teach you. The sources in, say you look at a Densho scroll of a Koryu system in Japan, and it's like you'll find a lot of them are pictures of the what do you call it? The demons? What are they called? The Oni. You'll have pictures of Oni fighting each other. And then you'll have a description of what the technique is, but just the name of the technique. You don't know how it's done. You actually have to train in the system to know how it's done, right? So like that's pretty much it. Now, I've not seen all Densho scrolls, so I can't say that. But the ones that have been made available, they're really kind of obscure. Whereas I think what the Western sources do very, very well is they are almost meticulous.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me. That reminds me a little bit of like the Lichtenauer tradition, where you have a poem that's very vague and like ethereal, but because you have the glossiers or people who were within the system that were writing out these instructions on how to explain it, you actually do have some context and some ability to understand what the hell they're saying. Because otherwise, you'd just be looking at a poem that just says a whole bunch of stuff. I think there's if I remember correctly, there's a sword poem from somewhere, and I can't remember where. And it might be English martial arts. So yeah, I think this is like the problem with like the English longsword system, is that there are all of these plays where basically they'll say, do this, do that. When they do this, you do that. But there's no actual explanation as to what the this and that are. So it just reads like a bunch of gibberish, and it's some of the craziest stuff you can possibly imagine. We actually, at our event called Oktoberfest, we do this secret tournament.
It's a great name.
Yeah, and you should come to Oktoberfest. We should have you come teach Bastone. That would be awesome.
Yeah, I'll do it.
Okay. Yeah. So we tricked Michael Chittister. We had somebody perform one of the English longsword plays, and we asked Michael Chittister if it was something that we had completely made up or whether or not it was a real play. And he said, and he was like, "Oh, that's got to be made up." And we were like, "No, man, sorry, that's English longsword."
That's fantastic.
So,
that is awesome.
You're right, though. I think that the context really matters, and it helps, especially for like the Bolognese tradition and stuff like that, that they're putting their material out at the time of print. You know, we just had Martin Fabian on, and he was complaining about how much information the Italian authors give. Right. And I was sitting there thinking to myself, well, that's kind of what makes the Italian authors kind of good, because they're giving you the minutia of your footwork, you know? Like, you take a passing step with your right, you let your left foot trail behind, and then you thrust in, or you do something like that. And it's like, there's so much detail there that you there's no question as to how they wanted you to do these things. And it might seem pedantic, but yeah,
it might be why German longsword is more popular with tournament fencers, is because it's so vague. You can just do whatever works, and then say, look, it's in the Zenel right here. I mean, and then it's basically like biblical interpretation. You can just make that shit say whatever the hell you want.
Right.
That is a great observation. You know, I find the same thing with Tai Chi push hands competitions. It just becomes grappling, and they're like, "Whoa, you know, I'm neutralizing and controlling, and I'm doing this," and it's like, you didn't do any Tai Chi movement. Shit up, bro. Like, you're just making shit up. So
I think you have greater license to make shit up with German.
Absolutely. But to that end, right? So, you know, tournament fencing is its own thing, right?
Right.
So we can't look at tournament fencing and then look at the historical sources and say they're the same thing. Right. They're not. So when you look at these people making shit up, that's what they were doing back then anyway. It's just other people were dying.
They're adapting to the circumstance.
That's all it is.
If you see there's like the fencing, I think it might have been a tournament like a no mask fencing, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, yeah, that looks like Meyer. Like, that's exactly what people are going to like. I don't want to get banged on the head. That shit hurts, man.
Absolutely. So, like, if we were to start actually going to war and killing each other with swords again, you would start to see all new systems being created.
Right.
Because that's the way it works.
That brings up an interesting point. I mean, were there any written systems that came from the Japanese tradition after World War II?
You mean like the Gendai systems, like the modern systems, or are you talking about the Koryu system, the old systems before Meiji Restoration?
Because wasn't there kind of like a rebirth, like almost a HEMA movement that happened in Japan in the 1940s, 30s and 40s?
Yes. Well, it actually happened before that.
Before that.
It was really started by the Meiji Restoration. They wanted to put the samurai ethos into regular people.
Right.
And so that's where we get Kendo, Judo, Karatedo, all of the Gendai systems, the modern systems. They were all developed in a way. Kano Jigoro, the guy who created Judo, he was a college professor. He was an educator, right? And he was very young, actually. A lot of people are, when they find out that he became like the head of, or he got Menkyu Kaiden. He was able to fully teach these old Koryu systems. I don't remember how many, like 3 or 4 of them, when he was like 19. Like he became a master at like 19, 20. Like that doesn't exist nowadays, right? People are like, oh, you think you're a master, you're just a boy, right? Like,
right.
But this is the way that it was back then. And so when he created Judo, he essentially wanted to give students something to compete with. So he created the belt system. A lot of people don't know that. He essentially, he took the ranks from the game of Go, right? So you have, Go has...
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So Go has an amateur rank called Q, and a professional rank called Dan, and it's a handicap system. So if I'm a 5Q and you're a 20 Dan, that means that I get 25 moves handicap.
Wow.
Oh,
right?
wow.
Because Q counts down as you get close to Dan, and then Dan counts up so that you can add the two, so you know how many moves you have as a handicap. So when you study any Japanese Gendai art, you have a Q rank, which are what they call color belts now, and it counts down, and then you have a Dan rank, and then it counts up. It's the exact same thing. So he originally had two belts, white and black, but then he went to a swim meet, and he saw that they had different colored bands, and that's where he got the idea for the different colored belts. It was from swimming. And so what you're talking about is the Japanese government wanting to essentially give young people these samurai ethos, but also give them physical fitness, martial practice, etc., so that they can become good soldiers and they can go into the military. That was the reason. But a lot of the samurai, what we think of as the samurai, is actually fabricated during this time. Specifically by one guy, and I don't remember his name, but he wrote a book, and I believe the book is called something like Bushido something, right? But it was written specifically to cater to us in the West. It painted the samurai in the light very similar to medieval knights, with chivalry and all this stuff, which we know was bullshit anyway. But, so he painted the samurai in that light, which then caused the West to become incredibly enamored with Japan. Victorian England was very enamored with Japan during the late 1800s. Victorian England, that's where we start to see Edward Barton Wright doing jujitsu and putting it and mixing it when making it bartitsu. Judo was the first art to actually really kind of be like formally taught here in the United States. What's his name? The president had his own judo instructor. What was his name?
Oh, Teddy.
Yes, Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah.
So what you're looking at, what you're talking about is the Japanese government really kind of trying to build a strong Japan by reviving, quote unquote, these old systems that aren't practiced anymore because they abolished the samurai, but they're giving them now to youth. and the general public to basically, create a strong army, create a strong military.
That's really fascinating, because I think that's what Dardi was doing in 1443. I think that was kind of the core ethos, is because he talks about training youth for the development and the defense of the city of Bologna. And I think it was a similar attempt at because prior to that, in the city of Bologna, there were these arms guilds. And I think that the arms guilds probably had these like core living traditions. And then through occupation and various other things, that went away in Bologna. And they basically reduced their ability to muster militias back down to just kind of like separating the city by districts, four different districts. And a lot of that, I think that martial ethos had sort of gone away. And so what Dardi's attempt to do was to train the youth and the young men up to like 25 years old, fighting age males, on how to develop that proficiency. And so you have, even if it's not from a like necessarily a like this is a military art kind of thing, you're just teaching them that martial practice, so that way they have that core, like what we were talking about earlier, that core martial body and that development where they can naturally transition into using any sort of military weapon once you put it in their hands. And it's interesting because like Camillo Palladini says something very similar in his book, and he's writing probably at the turn of the 17th century, so 1600s. But he basically says that you should learn every weapon. And he wants you to start with a single-handed sword, and then he wants you to learn sword in two hands, so two-handed sword. And then he wants you to learn sword and dagger, and then he wants you to kind of spread out and just learn the rest of his system. But he says that you should do that because if you ever find yourself in front of a mercenary captain or a captain of the city or somebody like that, that you can show your proficiency, and that way they'll give you a good job basically within, right? So I mean, that's it all kind of like builds back into each other and ties back together, which is really interesting.
That's why we should have like universal sword training in the United States now. I think we'd be a better country for it.
We used to in the Boy Scouts.
Did you? Have you never had sword training?
They're like look at old Boy Scout manuals. There's sword fighting and stick fighting in there.
Oh, that's so cool.
They tried to do that
when I tried to do that.
I was in Boy Scouts for like one day. I was like, enough.
Yeah, this is lame.
But if they had sword fighting, I would have stayed, man.
For sure.
Yeah,
maybe that's what we need to do. We need to come up with something. We'll just give them single stick,
Yeah.
So they can protect their little hands, and then you just put a mask on, and they just bash each other with single stick.
Absolutely.
We'll teach them Bastone, and we'll teach them single stick, and then they'll be
set.
And then when they get old enough, then you learn to use the sword.
I think that would be great. I believe that most kids nowadays, and I don't teach a lot of kids, right? I have a martial arts school, but I don't have a big kids program. I teach mostly teens and adults. And I do that primarily because I don't want to compete with all of the other schools who have big buses and pick kids up at schools and have after school programs. Like, that's not me. That's not my vibe, so to speak. But if I were to have a kids program, my main goal would be to teach them basic methods of neutralizing incoming force, controlling it, and then issuing strong outgoing force, whether it's with a weapon or empty hand. That's it, right? So I think there's wrestling in elementary schools, in many, right? Here in South Carolina, we have archery. Archery's huge. My daughter's friend across the street, she competes. It's very big here. So, like, we already have wrestling and archery in schools, but there's not a big fencing contingent, right? I don't see that a lot in elementary schools. I think that we should have more fencing in elementary schools. Even if it was just giving them a stick and teaching them fencing, not worrying about the rules, the foil and the epee and the hell, like not even worrying about all of the gear. Just I think that would be put it.
Just put a sword in their hand. They'll figure it out.
Just put a sword in their hand. You two have beef with each other? Here, have swords. No.
Problem solved.
Yeah, problem solved. But I think that would be so beneficial for youth.
You said
those
something.
three things. Like, go ahead.
You said something just then that I wanna come back to. So you said that your core tenet of what you would want to teach your students, like these young kids, right, is to receive and dissipate incoming force and respond with some sort of a powerful force, right?
And control it first.
And control it,
So,
right?
yes. So neutralize incoming force, control it and them, and then be able to issue
Back.
strong outgoing force.
Yeah.
That is the core tenet of Bolognese fencing. And I've been trying to
Tenet
preach
to
this
every
to
martial
people.
art, man.
Every martial art.
martial
I
art.
know. And it's amazing that people. So this is. I'm going to get on a tangent here, but this is one of my biggest beefs. This is one of my biggest beefs with the way that a lot of people view HEMA in particular, especially people who are coming from more of the German side of the arts, is they read into Jonas Lichtenauer that you have to seize the vor, And so they come at you with this, this offense and their secret cuts, their Meisterhau, and they come at you with the Meisterhau in an attempt to sort of initiate an engagement. And that's such a bad way to start a fight. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like-
I agree with you.
You're basically being the bully on the playground. That's just throwing a haymaker or overextending yourself and exposing yourself. But I feel like if you really look at the tenets of what was taught for the Meisterhau, all of them are in response to your opponent attacking first. And I think that there's this contingent that has just gone off on this notion that they need to be the ones that are attacking, and they've completely lost that true martial ethos of defense and counterattack.
Well, that's tournament fencing. That's what that is. It's a different thing now.
Yeah.
Right? We talked about that earlier. If you compete and that is what you base your techniques around, it's changed. It's something else now.
But I mean, it's probably because it works. I mean, people generally do what it works, and the thing is, if
Oh,
you are the
absolutely.
first one to attack, then I'm probably 75% of the time you're going to win that.
Right, because people don't know how to defend themselves.
Because why would you learn to defend yourself when it's so much easier to learn to attack? I mean, crazy easy to learn to attack. Really hard to learn to defend yourself to
Really
multiple intentions.
Yeah. But that's
because
why
nobody dies. Like, that's the thing, right? Like,
right.
if
well,
you,
that's the problem.
That's the problem. And I'm not saying that we have to change tournament fencing to match a more martial ethos. We just have to be honest about it. Just like if you do
it's its own
Taekwondo,
thing,
I don't care that you do Taekwondo. I don't care that you tap each other with your feet and get points. I don't care. Just be honest about it. You're not doing a martial art. You're doing Taekwondo, and that's fine.
And
And you're
that's great.
amazing at it. Right? I don't care if you do Muay Thai or BJJ or Judo. I don't care what you do. Just be honest about what it is you're doing.
Right.
And be proud of it.
And be proud of
Because
it. Right.
if you're good at it, it's something to be proud of.
Right. Like, if you're a sports fencer, be a great sport fencer. That's fantastic.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Nice.
I mean,
Yeah,
like,
that's
when I teach Bastone, I try to tell people all the time, like, I'm not teaching you to sword fight.
Right.
Right.
Don't take this and think that you're going to be able to sword fight somebody. That's not what this is for. This is for, hopefully, at least neutralizing the other person to the point where you can get them off your land. That's
All
it.
right, because this is basically just somebody's coming and fucking with your sheep, and you're trying to get them to leave your sheep alone.
Yes.
So this is your this is like cattle rustling, but it's sheep rustling in southern Italy.
So
really, these guys are like cowboys.
So in southern Italy, we have what were called briganti, right? They were brigands, right? Highwaymen. Essentially, there weren't many of these people, but every once in a while they would come by and it was petty theft. That's all it was. You're just defending yourself from petty theft. You're not at war. You're not dueling somebody.
Got it.
Right? So I'm not gonna come on here and be like, yes, Bastone is the most amazing martial art. No, it's just something. It is a simple way. Like, for instance, in West Columbia down here, we have a swamp, and the swamp is it's full of wild boar.
Okay.
So I have a student who hikes and is worried about the wild boar. Guess what she takes with her?
Stick.
Yeah, and she does the if she needs to, and it works, right? I've had people ward off coyotes with the things.
Yep.
I'm not
I had to do that recently myself.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
simple stuff.
They know humans are not really to be afraid of until we have something in our hands, and they're like, "Oh no, fuck, he's got one of those things. Nah, I'm going somewhere else." Otherwise, they're like, "You're fat and weak and slow."
Right. But that's the key. So yes, the tenet of I think every martial art is to neutralize incoming force, control the person, put them in a position where you decide what is necessary. That is key. If you need to kill them, kill them. If you need to break their arm, break their arm. If you need to push them away and run the other direction, do it. If you have to hold them in place for the police, do it. If you have to hold them in place for EMS, do it. If you're EMS and you're trying to hold them in place for your fellow EMS guy, do it, right? But you need to be able to neutralize their force, control them, and then decide what is necessary. That's life, right? Like that.
Yeah.
That's
No,
martial
we
life.
actually we see that said in the Bolognese corpus so many times. After you've gotten a pressa, a lot of times the authors will say, "Do what you think is necessary," or "Do what you, or you can do whatever you want at this point." Or at the end of Manciolino's Mezzespada section, which is his like swords crossed at the half sword, he tells you to tug their beard. Right, which is just like you're shaming somebody. Imagine being a sword master in the street, and some hothead comes up to you and challenges you to a fight, and so you use this technique on somebody, and you just absolutely embarrass them, and then you just tug their beard. Like, so much shame, right? They'll never be able to show them their face in Italy again. They're gonna have to move to Germany, right? And then then the food will suck, and they'll get fat, and they'll drink a lot of beer and become miserable and die alone, right?
That is an important thing about studying the Italian sources, like how important your public face is to your life then than it is to how we would perceive that sort of thing. Like, we're fairly shameless compared to them, where like your reputation is everything. Your family's reputation is everything. If you go to court or somebody accuses you of crime, there's not really lawyers, there's no forensics. It's basically your reputation versus somebody else's reputation. And so it's important to always cultivate a good reputation, and honor is that score. Your reputation score is your honor.
And that goes all the way down to the lowest chain. They will hide secrets like you can't imagine. My grandfather's family in Abruzzo, the Carozzas, which was my grandfather's name, his surname, the Carozzas were from a little town called Palena, but there were two Carrozza brothers that married two Tetti sisters, and the two Tetti sisters were from Torricelle Peligna, and they were Zingaro. They were gypsies.
Oh,
it's not a term they don't like to be called, but for people here who don't know, They were Rome Abruzzese. And so going back and looking at documents, I can find documents where, they're listed. Their condizione, their condition was listed as Zingaro. And then there are like, there's a birth certificate where it says, is a bambino tetti, like it doesn't even have a name, right? It's just baby. And it says
Baby of
that
this family.
this record was read aloud because there was a group of Zingaro tettis present, and they were inalfabeti. They were illiterate.
Okay.
And so I have a marriage certificate of two tettis. They were both related, and it says that their place of I think his name was Camilo. His where he lived was on the street on the hill. And so in Torricelli Poligna, there's a hill that's called Colle Zingaro, or Gypsy Hill.
Gypsy Hill,
That's where they all lived, right? So like,
okay.
But at the same time, okay, this is where it's crazy. At the same time, you have tettis that were mayors of Torricelli Poligna.
Right.
So you have like some of their family were.
Right.
Like if you watch Peaky Blinders, where
Yeah.
he's in politics, but then the rest of it, like a lot of his family is still on the road, right? Like,
Right.
that's kind of what happened. But you will never, like, I could go back and nobody in the Tetti family would ever say that they were Zingaro, because that was just
Just
it
so
was hidden.
shameful.
I was the first person to find out in my family doing research.
Got it. Okay.
It's amazing.
So even the contadino, even the tiny little peasants, they hide
Right.
stuff.
Oh yeah.
Like, protect whatever little honor you have.
Absolutely.
That makes
Absolutely.
sense. That totally makes sense. So here's one other thing I was wondering about. I've heard, anecdotally, that bucklers are used in stick fighting for self-defense in Italy. Have you run across people having bucklers, using bucklers as part of just a normal thing?
I haven't personally, but again, I've never been to Italy.
Right.
So,
Just
but
thought maybe if
in
you'd
my
heard them referenced, but yeah.
no, not me.
Okay.
Maybe I just haven't heard it. I know that the Italians love their knives.
Right.
I'll be honest, I'm not a huge fan of Italian knife fighting.
Okay.
I think that it is, I don't know, very showy. I think not. I wouldn't look at it and say that looks functional. Like, I don't know, but there's a. They like to call themselves cavalieri, and they like to think that they are, knights.
The lowest contadino
right?
is a...
Yeah.
Okay, sure, I gotcha.
But I respect it for being a tradition that they like to do. But I don't know if they use that on an everyday basis. But with crime being what it is in southern Italy, I would say they would have to use something. I don't know what's legal there to carry.
Right.
I don't think you can carry firearms. So I'm not sure. I'm sure you'd have to figure something out to carry if you want to be able to protect yourself.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, that's what I got. Any other questions, Josh?
Well, I kind of want to get into the Italian knife fighting a little bit more.
Okay.
I don't know enough about it to really talk about it. But there's some videos. Go and watch them. They use these big coltello, these big knives, and they kind of they treat them almost like little swords. But it's odd. It's interesting. Give some of the videos a watch. Yeah,
It'd be interesting
I'd like
to see
know
if
your
you
opinion.
connect that to Marozzo's
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
his machete system.
Yeah.
What I remember about it, I think you're going to see a lot of differences. They don't really do, it is mostly like tag. Like I'm gonna try to cut your hand, or I'm gonna try to cut your arm, and and not get touched by you as much as possible. So they do like.
That sounds like Moroso's thing. Yeah, like basically fuck up their hand, and then if they try to attack your head, set their sword aside, and like we said, dissipate incoming force, and then fuck them up. Well, that's a lot of snipey stuff.
Yeah, he's very explicit about getting the hell out of dodge. Like once you've cut their hand or you've stabbed them, you take 5 steps back, guaranteed.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then maybe I'm misremembering, which is absolutely possible.
So he has 2 dagger sections. So one of them is like dagger wrestling, and that's in his book 5. But at the beginning of book 2, he does dagger alone, and it's like a long dagger. So it's like a long cut and thrust dagger, and that's the one where he basically tells you to get the hell out of dodge.
Okay, that I don't think that. Yeah, I'm thinking about the dagger wrestling.
Got it. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's very different. Yeah. Because that one you don't have a weapon, and that's just for a stabbing dagger. So it's just against.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I would say it's probably similar to the other one, because if it's a long knife, that's what they use. They use these long coltellos, blades like a foot long sometimes.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, I assumed it was like a cinque dea, basically.
Yeah, 16, 17 inches,
18
maybe.
inches, nice and thick. Basically a machete, like a fancy machete.
Yeah.
Skinnier, though. Yeah.
Skinnier, okay.
Though. Yeah. So, like, if you think about a stiletto, like long and skinny, but foldable, chink, like that.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
That sounds fun.
I'm excited to hear your opinion after you watch some of the videos.
I'll definitely share.
Cool.
Yeah, that's really awesome. So, what are some sources that people can look at for learning Italian stick fighting? Are there any written sources, or obviously this is a good chance to also plug your system and what you're doing. I know that you have some video resources and online resources available to people. So let's talk about that.
So I actually have a instructor certification course. That's a virtual course. It gives you access to a Google Classroom that has tons of video things, video sources and stuff that you go through, and you have to answer quizzes and send me videos and stuff like that. And I highly suggest finding a partner to do it with. Right now the only level that's available is the Associati level. It's the first level. The next 2 will be coming here shortly, but essentially it just gives you the ability to teach it however you see fit. Once you become professore, you can modify it even if you want to, and kind of create your own thing. And that's available on my school's website, wellwithinma.com, and you'll see the link for Contro Passo instructor certification course. So that absolutely they can learn from me. There are some written sources. My friend Piero in Italy has some books on the Sicilian stick. I don't know if the guys in Puglia have anything written. It's been a while since I've talked to them. But there's always some information out there that people can look for. And so there are different kinds of bastone. What I teach is bastone a due mani, which is a 2-handed stick.
Yeah.
But then you will also find bastone di passeggio, which is a walking stick, which is kind of held more like a small sword. So it depends on what you want to learn. I think Marco Lora does the passeggio as well. So there's some good resources out there if you want to look for it. And if you're on the East Coast and you find your way down into South Carolina, you're more than welcome to come and train with me. I'm in Columbia, which is right in the middle of the state. So
and they can learn it in 20-something minutes.
20-something minutes, yep. And then you'll go, this is it? Because it really is simple.
It is, but I do think that there's a level of like I was looking at your structure for your sort of your pedagogical approach and how you kind of set up your classes and everything like that, because I don't want to depreciate what you're offering in your certification in terms of like, you could do this in 20 minutes. Like there's a lot, even in that class, like you gave us the foundation in 20 minutes, for sure. Right. And I could take some of that foundation, but what I experienced from taking your class is one, again, you talk about training that martial body, but also just the ability to kind of keep that constant motion. So for practitioners of Bolognese fencing, if they want to learn how to start to create those pathways of like really getting something moving, and perhaps like a sword is not the best tool to start with because of its weight and its, again, the body mechanics and things like that, and the depth. This might actually be a really great place to start to like really start to learn how to keep that perpetual motion and really kind of keep a weapon moving, and kind of start to learn those fundamentals. That was my experience, at least. And it's an amazing workout too, by the way. So, I hope that people will look into it and take it seriously, because I know that I am. Like I'm definitely interested in doing it, because I think, yeah, it provides legitimacy for like, hey, I'm teaching Italian martial arts. There's actually a path of certification here that I can actually say that yes, I am teaching Italian martial arts.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
So,
and
super cool.
So the first course is a 6-month course, really. And it gives you the ability to, again, cultivate that Contro Passo body, which, if you come from a sword tradition, like I said, where, you are used to being fixed in your stances or heavy, it's going to take some time to learn how to dance. And some of the coordination necessary for some of the assaulti, I think, can be a little confusing and might take some time. So, but a lot of the stuff is tactical. So, learning the technique, this is why I could teach you the techniques in 20 minutes, but to understand how we use this in the context it's used, where we want to be able to set up these sorts of exchanges and how we want to move in and out of them, that's really what takes time, because the experience of beating a sword or grappling or something like it, you have to kind of remove yourself from that and put yourself in a different environment. I think, me personally, why I think it's worth learning is it gives you the ability to pick up anything and use it, whether it has an edge, a point, right? It doesn't matter what it is. I think if you are able to do the bastone and build that into your biomechanics, you could pick up anything and be able to use it. My student Bo, right, who put on Midlands Madness, he's been my student since he was like 10, right? And he came to me one time when he first started competing, and he was like, I did good. And I was like, well, yeah, sure. He was like, well, I never did longsword before. And I was like, yeah, but you did everything else that we did. It's all the same, right? So he's like, oh yeah, I guess, right? So it's like this universal, right? It's universal. It's a universal principle. And my big thing is good martial is universal.
Right.
And I preach this all the time. If your system or style of martial arts does something so unique and special that it doesn't exist anywhere else, it's wrong, and it's a fantasy, and you should stop doing it. Because I can swing a sword around and do all really crazy things with it when I'm not met with an opponent who's trying to hurt me.
Right.
But as soon as I'm met with an opponent trying to hurt me and trying to neutralize my force, things start to look the same.
Right.
Doesn't matter what system I'm doing. So unless you have that experience and can use your body in that way, then yeah, I mean, you can do all kinds of things. Sport karate, where they spin the sword and they spin it and flip it and, you know, use it like a baton. Like, that's great, but it's not sword, right? Like we talked earlier. Be honest, it's baton twirling with a sword-like object, and that's okay.
It looks awesome, but yeah, it's twirling.
It looks awesome. Yes. So when you study the bastone, it's cheap, right? Sticks are cheap. You don't have to spend a whole bunch of money on gear, and then you can learn movements and techniques and tactics that will work with whatever you want to pick up.
Awesome. Yeah, that's probably a great place to kind of wrap this up, because I think
that's a perfect.
I think you summed up this entire conversation.
So we're talking about sticks,
brilliant.
but we're not really talking about sticks. We're talking about the whole martial arts panoply. Stick is just the easiest one to sort of grasp mentally.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Cool.
It's so easy that peasants can do it.
Right.
With no training.
Right. Something they can twirl around while they're watching their sheep.
Absolutely.
Awesome, Dan. Well, thank you so much for coming on and doing this with us, man. I really appreciate it.
Great to meet you, Dan. I hope I get to meet you. I want to see this Bastone in action. This sounds great.
Let's do it.
Oh yeah, we're gonna start dragging you around to HEMA events. Don't worry.
Yeah,
I'm gonna every chance I get, I'm gonna pull you in. So
I'm there, man. Just let me know.
Awesome. Well, thank you, sir.
All right, thanks,
Thank
man.
you.
Good to meet
Peace,
you,
guys. Ciao.